The day they handed me that plaque, I almost laughed out loud. 22 years. A brass rectangle with my name engraved on it, a firm handshake from the regional VP, and a gift card to a steakhouse I'd never been to. That was it. No mention of the $4.2 million I'd saved the company in a single fiscal year. No mention of the audit I'd navigated practically alone when our external firm walked out mid-engagement. Just a plaque, a handshake, and a $40 gift card. I drove home that night thinking, this is fine. I've been here before. You put your head down, you do the work, and eventually the right people notice. I was 53 years old. I should have known better. My name is not important for this story. What matters is what I built and what they tried to take from me. I joined the company in 2001 as a mid-level financial analyst. The place was a regional manufacturing firm out of Columbus, Ohio. Industrial components mostly. Niche business, but profitable when it was run right. When I joined, the finance department was a mess. 3 different spreadsheet systems that didn't talk to each other. A reporting process that took 2 weeks to close the books each quarter, and a controller who was 6 months from retirement and fully checked out. I spent my first 2 years just trying to understand what we actually had. By year 5, I had rebuilt the department from scratch. I designed a custom financial modeling system. I called it internally the Forecast Bridge, that consolidated our revenue projections, cost tracking, and cash flow analysis into one integrated structure. I coded parts of it myself in Excel VBA, later migrated the logic to a proper database architecture with the help of one good IT contractor we brought in for 3 months. The model became the backbone of every board presentation, every bank covenant test, every acquisition analysis the company ran for the next decade and a half. It was mine. I built it. And my employment contract, the one I signed in 2003 when I moved into the senior financial analyst role, had a clause I want you to remember. Any intellectual property developed primarily to the employee's independent initiative outside of assigned work duties and documented as such remains the property of the employee unless explicitly purchased by the company. I had documented everything, every version, every late night I spent at my kitchen table refining the projection logic because nobody asked me to, but I knew we needed it. I had emails going back 15 years, time-stamping my development work. I had a hard drive at home with every build. I kept that clause in the back of my mind the way you keep a spare key. You hope you never need it, but you don't throw it away. In 2019, the company was acquired by a private equity group out of Chicago. I won't name them, but if you work in Midwest manufacturing, you know the type. They came in with a lot of energy, a lot of talk about operational efficiency, and a managing partner's son who had an MBA from a school with a good football team and 0 real-world experience in anything resembling finance. I'll call him the new director, because that's what they made him. Director of Finance Strategy, a title they invented for him that sat awkwardly above my actual title of VP of Financial Planning and Analysis. He was 31. He wore slim-fit suits and talked about synergies in every meeting. He had the social confidence of someone who had never been wrong about anything because no one had ever let him be wrong about anything. The first thing he did was schedule a meeting with me to align on vision. I sat across from him in the conference room. He had a PowerPoint open on his laptop, 12 slides about modernizing the finance function, bringing in a third-party FP&A platform, and, I'm quoting directly from slide 7, sunsetting legacy tools built on tribal knowledge. Tribal knowledge, that's what he called it. I asked him which tool specifically he was referring to. He smiled the way young people smile when they think they're being diplomatic. The modeling system you've been running. It's impressive work, but it's not scalable. We're going to bring in an outside vendor to build something enterprise grade. I nodded. I said I understood. I asked if there would be a transition period where the vendor would work with me to understand the existing logic. He said, and I want you to hear this clearly, we're probably going to handle that internally. Don't want to create any bottlenecks. I drove home that night and pulled out my copy of my 2003 employment contract. I read Section 9, Paragraph C. I read it twice. Then I called my brother-in-law, who is an employment attorney in Cincinnati, and I read it to him out loud. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They're not going to like this." I said, "I know." For the next 4 months, I watched. The new director brought in a vendor, a boutique consulting firm from Atlanta. 6 people, 3 of whom I later learned had never worked in manufacturing finance before. They spent the first month asking me questions. I answered all of them honestly. I showed them the forecast bridge architecture. I walked them through the logic. I was helpful. I was professional. I smiled. What I was also doing was documenting every single interaction in writing, every email where they asked me to explain the model, every meeting where they took screenshots of my screens, every time one of the junior consultants asked me to send over a file, just so we can reference it while we build the new system. By month 3, it became clear they weren't building anything new. They were rebuilding my model with a different interface slapped on top. The underlying logic, the revenue segmentation structure, the rolling cash flow forecast methodology, the bank covenant trigger alerts was mine. Word for word in some cases, formula for formula. I kept documenting. In the fall of that year, the new director sat me down and told me my role was being restructured. The company was creating a new position, Senior Financial Reporting Manager, and they felt I was a strong fit. It paid $18,000 less than my current role. It reported to a woman they were hiring from outside who would be the new VP of Finance. I thanked him for letting me know. I asked for the offer in writing. Then I went home and called my brother-in-law again. The next morning, I sent one email. It went to the new director, the CEO, the CFO, and the company's outside legal counsel. My brother-in-law had helped me draft it over the weekend. It was 4 paragraphs long. It did not use emotional language. It did not threaten anything dramatic. It simply stated that I was the original developer of the Forecast Bridge financial modeling system, that under Section 9, Paragraph C of my 2003 employment contract, the intellectual property rights to that system remained with me, that the vendor currently engaged by the company appeared to be reproducing that system without authorization, and that I was requesting the company cease all use of the original Forecast Bridge architecture within 14 days, pending a licensing discussion. I attached 17 pages of documentation, version histories, email timestamps, screenshots, my original development notes from 2003 with handwritten dates in the margins. Then I made myself a cup of coffee and waited. The first call came at 11:47 that morning. It was the CFO. She had a measured voice, the kind that's been trained to stay calm in crisis situations, but I could hear something underneath it. She said they needed to discuss my concerns. I said I was happy to discuss. Through counsel. She paused. Then she said she'd be in touch. The second call came at 2:15. It was the company's outside legal counsel. He was more direct. He said the company believed the Forecast Bridge system had been developed in the course of my normal employment duties and therefore was company property under standard work-for-hire principles. I said that was an interesting position, and that I looked forward to sharing my documentation with whatever court we ended up in. Another pause. He said they would review the documentation I had sent. What happened over the next 3 weeks was something I had not entirely anticipated, even though I should have. The consulting firm's new system, the one they've been building for 6 months and were 2 weeks from presenting to the board, was not functional without the Forecast Bridge logic underneath it. They had not actually rebuilt anything. They had assumed they could just take what I had and redress it. When I sent that email, the vendor went silent. They had their own legal exposure now. They stopped delivering. They stopped returning calls from the new director. The company's Q3 close was coming up in 3 weeks. Without a working financial model, they could not produce the consolidated reporting package that went to the board or the bank covenant compliance certificate that was due to their lenders. I know this because the CFO called me again on a Thursday evening 11 days after my email. She didn't start with pleasantries this time. She said, "We have a problem." I said, "I know." She asked if I would be willing to meet. I said yes, but I had one condition. My brother-in-law would be present. She said that was fine. We met on a Monday at a neutral location, a conference room at my brother-in-law's firm. The CFO came with the outside counsel. The new director was not there. I found out later he had been told to stay home. The outside counsel opened by saying the company recognized my contributions and wanted to find a path forward that was fair to all parties. I let him finish. Then my brother-in-law slid a 2-page document across the table. It was a licensing agreement. The company would pay a one-time licensing fee of $410,000 for unrestricted use of the Forecast Bridge system and all its derivatives. In addition, they would retain me as a financial modeling consultant for a period of 18 months at $195 per hour, with a guaranteed minimum of 20 hours per month. My original role and compensation would be restored immediately, and the restructured position they had offered me would be rescinded. The outside counsel looked at the document for a long time. Then he looked at the CFO. She said, "Can we have a moment?" My brother-in-law said, "Of course." We stepped into the hallway. I got a water from the cart by the reception desk. We stood there for about 10 minutes. I remember looking out the window at the parking garage across the street and feeling remarkably calm. Not happy exactly, just settled, like something that had been out of alignment for a long time had finally clicked into the right position. They came back in. The outside counsel said the company was prepared to accept the licensing fee and the consulting arrangement. They wanted to discuss the role reinstatement. My brother-in-law said the role reinstatement was not negotiable. Another pause. The CFO nodded. We signed a term sheet before we left that room. The full agreement was executed 11 days later. $410,000 wired to my personal account the following week. Consulting arrangement signed, with terms I had drafted. My VP title reinstated with a salary adjustment that actually put me above where I had been the year before. The consulting firm from Atlanta was terminated. I heard through someone still at the company that they faced their own legal exposure for what they'd done with my architecture, though I don't know how that resolved. The new director resigned 4 months later. I was told he relocated back to Chicago. I didn't ask for details. What I will tell you is this. I did not do any of it out of anger. I want to be clear about that, because I've thought about it a lot. There were moments, sitting in that restructuring conversation, hearing the phrase tribal knowledge, reading the job description for the demoted role they were offering me, where I felt something that could have turned into rage if I'd let it. But I didn't let it. I went home, I read my contract, and I treated it like a problem to solve. Because here's what 22 years in corporate finance teaches you. Emotion is a liability in negotiation. The moment you let them see that you're hurt, you've given them something to work with. What they can't work with is documentation, a legitimate legal position, and a brother-in-law who passed the Ohio bar exam on the first try. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing I actually want you to walk away with is this. Read your contract. Not just when you sign it. Read it again now, wherever you are in your career. The section on intellectual property is usually buried in the back. A few paragraphs that look like boilerplate. It might not be boilerplate. What you build at work, even if you build it at night, at your kitchen table because you love the problem and nobody told you to, might be yours in a way the company hasn't thought about. They didn't think about mine for 22 years. Then one day they needed to. My daughter asked me, a few weeks after it was all settled, whether I regretted not leaving sooner. She's 27, works in marketing, thinks about these things differently than I do. I told her no. Because if I had left sooner, I would have left the documentation behind. I would have handed over the keys and moved on, and never known what those keys actually unlocked. She thought about that for a minute. Then she said, "So you basically got paid twice for the same work." I told her that was one way to look at it. She grinned. "That's very dad." I started consulting the following month. First engagement was a 12-hour project helping them prepare for a bank review. I billed at my rate, submitted my invoice, and had a check within 30 days. I sat in my home office with a cup of coffee that I had made myself in my own kitchen on my own schedule, and I thought about the plaque on my shelf with the steakhouse gift card that I had finally used. The steak was fine. I still have the wire confirmation saved in a folder on my desktop, not because I need it, just because sometimes you need a reminder that doing things the right way actually pays off. Not metaphorically, not eventually in some vague karmic sense, but literally, in dollars, wired to your account on a Tuesday afternoon. What I've been turning over in my mind since all of this settled isn't the money. It's the sequence. The way everything unfolded had a logic to it that I didn't fully see while I was inside it. I spent 22 years building something carefully, documenting my work, honoring my obligations, doing more than was asked without making a scene about it. And for a long time, none of that seemed to matter. The company took what I built and treated it like furniture. Useful, unremarkable, something you don't think about until it breaks. But here's what I've come to believe. The way you work when nobody's watching is the thing that saves you when it counts. I didn't document those development notes in 2003 because I was planning something. I did it because that's just how I worked. I kept records because I respected the work enough to treat it seriously. That habit, that quiet, unglamorous discipline of doing things right even when there's no audience, that's what gave me something to stand on 20 years later. And then there's the question of how I responded when it finally went wrong. I want to be honest, I felt the anger. The night I read that restructuring offer, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. There's something particular about being dismissed by someone who couldn't have built what you built in 10 lifetimes. It gets under your skin in a way that's hard to describe. But I made a choice, sitting there, to take that energy and point it somewhere useful. I called my brother-in-law. I read my contract. I thought about what I actually had. That choice, to think clearly instead of react emotionally, is the whole story. Not the clause, not the documentation, not even the $410,000. All of that was downstream of one decision, to be the smartest person in the room about my own situation instead of the most upset one. My daughter said I got paid twice for the same work. She wasn't wrong. But I think the deeper truth is that I got paid for the kind of person I had been for 22 years before any of this happened. The payout was just the visible part. The real work was invisible. It was every late night at the kitchen table, every version saved, every time I chose integrity over shortcuts when nobody would have known the difference. There's a line I keep coming back to. You don't rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your preparation. I didn't become someone who had leverage in that conference room on the day I needed it. I had been becoming that person for 2 decades without realizing that's what I was doing. If you're somewhere in the middle of a situation that feels unfair, and if you've watched enough of these stories, you probably are, I'd ask you to consider what you're building right now. Today, when the pressure is low and nobody's paying attention, because the record you're keeping, the habits you're forming, the way you treat your own work when there's no immediate reward for treating it well. That's not background noise. That's the whole thing. That's what you'll have when the moment finally arrives. The screen on my badge card resped at 2:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. That's fast. And I remember thinking, at my own rate, on my own terms, in the quiet. That's was something else entirely.